Have you ever just stopped and thought about how often conspiracy theories pop up? Like in conversations, online, everywhere. It often feels like they're just woven into, everything, doesn't it? From huge world events down to, like, everyday stuff.
Absolutely.
But have you ever really dug into why they seem to, well, take root like that? What makes these ideas so sticky, so compelling for some people?
That's a really, really good question. And it takes us right into the deep end of how our minds work, As humans, we're sort of inherently programmed to make sense of things,
Let's
right?
to connect the dots.
Exactly, to find meaning.
Yeah.
But sometimes that very fundamental drive, that wiring, can actually lead us down some pretty strange, sometimes illogical paths.
And that's exactly what we're diving into today.
Yeah.
We're pulling back the curtain, really exploring the basic psychological gears that might lead people to believe not just in conspiracy theories, but maybe even in supernatural stuff too. It's all about understanding how our very human need to find patterns,
Yeah.
which is usually super helpful, right? For survival, learning.
Essential, yeah.
But how that same tendency can sometimes cause us to connect dots that, well, just aren't actually there.
Right. Our mission today really is to unpack this fascinating pile of research. It's systematically tested an idea that's been around for ages, but surprisingly didn't have a ton of direct proof.
Which idea is that?
The idea that these, let's call them irrational beliefs, are really grounded in something called illusory pattern perception.
Okay.
So we'll break down what that actually means, walk you through how researchers studied it pretty rigorously, actually, across several experiments, and then talk about the ripple effects. What does this mean for us, for society, for how we handle information today?
Sounds fascinating. Expect some surprises, maybe a new way to think about how we all make sense of the world.
Definitely. Get ready.
Okay, so let's start by setting the stage. Before we get into the nuts and bolts, the how and why, let's be really clear about what we mean by irrational beliefs in the context of this research. And importantly, we're not here to, label people or anything.
That's a crucial point.
Yeah.
In this research context, irrational beliefs basically refers to assumptions about how the world works that don't really have a solid footing. They're unfounded, unscientific, maybe illogical.
Yeah.
But the key thing, like you said, is that these aren't just weird ideas held by a tiny fringe group. They're actually surprisingly common among, ordinary folks, non-pathological citizens. The research isn't about diagnosing people. It's about understanding these common ways our minds work, how we interpret things.
Got it. So it's more about the cognitive process and the person.
Right.
Now, let's zoom in on conspiracy theories within that definition. What makes them distinct? Because there's a really important line to draw here, isn't there? Not all conspiracies are, conspiracy theories in this sense.
You're absolutely right. Super important distinction. So at its core, a conspiracy theory is the assumption that some group, usually, is secretly plotting together to achieve goals that are often seen as, evil or harmful. Now, the crucial part, not all actual conspiracies are irrational. History shows us real conspiracies happen. Think Watergate, right?
Sure. Classic example.
High-level government officials conspiring to cover up illegal stuff. Or the Iran-Contra affair back in the 80s. secret deals, arms for hostages, breaking the rules. These were real, investigated, proven conspiracies.
So today's focus isn't on those kinds of documented events. We're looking at the theories that go beyond what seems logical or scientifically, plausible.
Precisely. The research zeroes in on theories that are just highly unlikely or totally unsubstantiated when you look at the logic, the science, the facts. We're talking about things like the belief that 9/11 was an inside job by the U.S. government, or
Right.
the idea that big pharma deliberately spreads diseases to make money or maybe suppresses cures, or that climate change is just a big hoax made up by scientists.
Okay, those are the kinds of theories we're talking about.
Yeah, those beliefs that, despite lacking credible evidence, still manage to circulate and influence a lot of people.
And why is it so important to look closely at these specific types of beliefs? They're just like harmless water cooler chat, aren't they?
No, definitely not harmless. The research consistently shows that believing these unfounded theories can actually predict a whole bunch of, well, maladaptive perceptions and behaviors, stuff with real societal consequences.
Like what?
Well, things like pulling back from politics, less voting, less civic engagement, also maybe increased hostility towards others, and in some really extreme cases, it can even be linked to radicalization.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, if you start believing that some secretive evil force is pulling all the strings, you might feel totally powerless, right? So you might just check out.
Or maybe the opposite. Feel like you have to fight back somehow.
Exactly. Or conversely, some might feel like they're justified in taking extreme actions, operating outside the usual rules because they think they're fighting this hidden enemy.
That's pretty heavy. Now, this research isn't only about conspiracy theories, right? It also looks at supernatural beliefs. How are
Okay.
those defined here?
Right. So supernatural beliefs in this context are basically beliefs that clash with the established, scientifically understood principles of nature. It's a broad category, includes things like
Like
superstitions.
walking under ladders, that kind of thing?
Yeah, or belief in the paranormal, ghosts, UFOs, believing horoscopes are genuinely predictive, or that things like telepathy are real.
And just like the conspiracy theories, these aren't just personal quirks either. They can have real-world effects.
Oh, absolutely. And sometimes pretty serious ones. For instance, someone might choose to see like a spiritual healer or a psychic instead of a qualified doctor for a serious illness. That can be incredibly harmful.
Yeah, definitely.
Or, making huge life decisions, buying a house, getting divorced, big business deals based purely on tarot cards or astrology readings. When you take rational thinking and evidence out of those decisions, the impact can be pretty devastating.
So, okay, given how common these beliefs are and the potential harm they can cause, the big question driving all this research is, how do these ideas actually start and take hold in our minds? And I'm guessing this is where pattern perception really enters the picture.
You nailed it. This is exactly where that core connection starts to emerge. Our drive to find patterns.
Let's get right into that then. Illusory pattern perception, our brains connecting invisible dots. It's pretty accepted that we're all pattern finders, right? It's fundamental.
Absolutely fundamental. Pattern perception is this automatic, often unconscious tendency we have to spot meaningful relationships, find order in all the stuff coming at us from the world. And it's incredibly functional, like essential for survival, for navigating daily life.
How so?
Think about it. Red light means stop. Danger. Thirst means drink water. Being consistently rude to someone, probably get rudeness back. Our brains are just built to quickly pick up on these real predictive patterns. It lets us learn, adapt, function.
Okay, so it's a super useful tool. But then, where does it go wrong? The word illusory obviously suggests something's off, a kind of glitch.
That's exactly it. Sometimes this really useful process gets distorted. We start connecting dots that are actually totally unrelated. No real causal link, no predictive value. That's illusory pattern perception, seeing meaningful patterns in what is actually just random noise.
Why is that so hard for us? Why can't we just see randomness for what it is?
It's surprisingly difficult. Humans really struggle to recognize true randomness because, random sequences can, just by chance, have clusters or streaks or look kind of regular.
Like flipping a coin and getting 5 heads in a row.
Yeah.
Feels like something's going on.
Exactly. It feels non-random, even though it's perfectly possible within randomness. So it's hard to really appreciate the role of pure coincidence. We often mistake random stuff as being caused by something, expect it to predict the future, when it really has no predictive power at all.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. I probably do that all the time without thinking. Like you wait ages for a bus, then 3 show up at once. My first thought is, typical, always bunched up. even though it's probably just random variation.
Perfect example. And there are some classic examples from psychology that really highlight this. One of the most famous is the hot hand in basketball.
Oh, yeah, I know that one. Everyone believes it. A player makes a few shots and suddenly they're on fire, guaranteed to make the next one. Announcers, fans, even the players themselves.
It feels so intuitively right, doesn't it? But the studies, like the big one by Gilovich, Filoni, and Tversky back in '85, consistently show there's no statistical basis for it. It's just chance. A player's chance of making the next shot is basically independent of the last one.
But it feels like a pattern.
It really does. Our brains just crave that narrative, that predictability, even when it isn't there.
So our pattern-seeking brain is desperately trying to impose order on randomness. What are some other examples?
Well, think about habitual gamblers. Research shows they're much more likely to spot patterns in things like roulette spins or card draws places where patterns objectively don't exist.
Yeah, seeing trends that aren't there.
And it's not just humans. B.F. Skinner's work with pigeons showed this, too. He called it superstitious behavior. He'd feed hungry pigeons at fixed intervals, whatever the pigeon happened to be doing right before the food arrived, maybe turning in a circle, picking a spot. It would start repeating that action, acting as if its behavior caused the food to appear, even though the food delivery was totally random and independent of what the pigeon did.
Wow. So even pigeons try to find cause and effect where there's just coincidence. That really shows how deep this drive goes.
It speaks to a really fundamental cognitive bias, yeah, inferring cause from just things happening close together in time.
So this powerful need to find patterns, it's not just about practical stuff like traffic lights or predicting shots. It seems tied to our psychology, maybe something deeper. Is there a bigger motivation behind this relentless pattern seeking?
There absolutely seems to be. And it often comes down to a really basic human need, coping with uncertainty, dealing with how complex and unpredictable life can feel.
How does that connect to conspiracy theories or supernatural beliefs?
Well, both are often seen as ways to grapple with situations that feel ambiguous, uncertain, maybe distressing. They offer frameworks, stories that help people make sense of events that might otherwise seem just chaotic or random or overwhelming. Think about big, scary societal events. People really want a coherent story. They want meaning. And sometimes conspiracy theories seem to offer that explanation, that sense of understanding why it happened.
So it's like imposing structure on chaos, making the unpredictable feel predictable.
Exactly that. And similarly, supernatural beliefs are often argued to give the world a sense of meaning, maybe purpose. They can offer comfort, help people cope with those basic uncertainties of being human. When things feel out of control, random, finding patterns, even if they're illusory patterns, makes that unpredictable world feel a bit more ordered, more manageable, predictable even.
That makes a lot of sense. We just crave control, certainty. And if real patterns aren't obvious, maybe our brains just kind of invent them to fill that gap.
That's a really key insight. Yeah. Research consistently shows people are much more likely to believe conspiracy theories when they feel like they lack control in their lives or when they're feeling really uncertain.
And that applies to supernatural beliefs too.
Yes, feeling a lack of control also significantly boosts belief in the supernatural. If the world feels chaotic and beyond your influence, then seeing some hidden underlying order, even if it's a negative order, like a secret cabal pulling strings, can ironically give you a distorted sense of predictability. It's like, okay, at least someone's in charge, even if they're bad.
Wow, that's a strange kind of comfort.
It is. And studies have actually experimentally threatened people's sense of control and found that doing so directly makes them more likely to see patterns in random noise. It perfectly mirrors the effect on irrational beliefs. It all points back to this deep psychological need to make the world feel less random, more ordered, even if that order isn't real.
Okay, this psychological foundation really sets the stage for the actual research you mentioned earlier, those 5 studies that systematically tested this connection. What was the main goal of that whole research program?
The big goal was really to get solid, direct evidence for this idea that illusory pattern perception is at the heart of these irrational beliefs, especially conspiracy theories. People had speculated about it a lot, but the direct empirical proof, particularly looking at the cognitive nuts and bolts of conspiracy belief, was kind of thin. This research program aimed to fill that gap.
Right. So let's start with study one. How did they first try to establish that basic correlation, linking seeing patterns in random stuff like coin tosses to holding these beliefs?
Study one was pretty straightforward. They showed people sequences of 100 coin tosses, genuinely random, generated by a computer, balanced heads and tails overall. They were shown in chunks. Then the whole sequence. People just had to rate how random or how determined each sequence felt.
Okay, judging the randomness of something actually random.
Exactly. Then the researchers measured how strongly people believed in various existing conspiracy theories, stuff like, the government hiding info about big events or having advanced knowledge of 9/11. They also included some fictitious conspiracy theories like that Red Bull contains illegal stuff.
Fictitious ones, why?
Probably to see if the tendency extended beyond well-known theories, to see if it was a general susceptibility to conspiratorial thinking. And finally, they measured belief in supernatural things, horoscopes, telepathy, stuff like that.
So did they find a link? Did people who saw patterns in those random coin flips also tend to buy into these theories?
Yes, that was a core finding, a clear, significant correlation. People who perceived more patterns in the purely random coin tosses were significantly more likely to endorse all three types of beliefs: existing conspiracy theories, the made-up ones, and supernatural beliefs.
Wow, all three.
All three. The stats were pretty strong, suggesting a meaningful connection. This was really the first direct evidence showing this specific link for conspiracy theories, while also confirming what previous research hinted at for supernatural beliefs. It showed people really do differ in how much order they see where none exists.
Okay, that's a strong
Yeah.
start. So correlation established.
Mhm.
How did study two try to push it further to actually manipulate the pattern seeking and see what happened?
Study 2 wanted to get closer to causality, maybe indirectly. The idea was, can we actually nudge people to look for patterns and see if that affects their beliefs? So participants played a coin tossing game using the same random sequences. But here's the manipulation.
Uh-huh.
One group was explicitly told to try to find a pattern intuitively. That was the high pattern search group. The other group, the control, was told the sequences were definitely random, each toss independent. The low pattern search group. Afterwards, they measured pattern perception again and then asked about their beliefs.
So the idea was, if you prime people to look for patterns, they'll see more patterns. And that increase in pattern perception might then flow through to increase their irrational beliefs.
That was exactly the thinking. And the first part worked. The high pattern search instruction did make people see more patterns in the random sequences. But interestingly, it didn't directly change their beliefs right away.
Oh, so it didn't work.
Not directly, but here's the crucial part. It had a significant indirect effect. That initial increase in pattern perception then led to an increase in belief across all three types: existing conspiracies, fictitious ones, and supernatural beliefs.
So the nudge changed perception, and that change in perception then influenced beliefs down the line. That suggests a really powerful, even if subtle, connection. Just being encouraged to look for patterns, even where there aren't any, can kind of prime the pump for these beliefs.
It really highlights how flexible our perception of randomness is and how those subtle shifts can have real consequences for what we end up believing. A neat demonstration of how cognitive biases can shape our view of the world.
Okay, study 3 sounds like it went in a totally different direction, using visual art instead of coin tosses.
Yeah.
How did they use paintings by artists like Vasarely and Pollock to isolate illusory pattern perception specifically?
Yeah, this is a really clever study. It aimed to sharpen the focus. Because, with coin tosses, even though they're random, they can look patterned sometimes. So maybe people in the first studies were just good at spotting any kind of pattern, real or imagined.
Right, how do you separate those?
Exactly. So study 3 used art. One group saw paintings by Victor Vasarely, very geometric, structured, lots of clear optical patterns. You'd expect people to see patterns there. The other group saw paintings by Jackson Pollock, abstract expressionism, drips, splatters, looks chaotic, unstructured.
Definitely chaotic.
So the question was, does seeing patterns in the structured Vasarely art link to irrational beliefs? Or is it specifically about seeing patterns in the chaotic Pollock art? Is it about general pattern finding or illusory pattern finding in randomness?
And what did they find? Was it the Pollock connection?
Bingo. That was the crucial revelation. Perceiving patterns in the unstructured, chaotic Pollock paintings significantly predicted higher belief in existing conspiracy theories, fictitious ones, and supernatural beliefs. People who found order in that apparent randomness were more susceptible.
But not the Vasarely paintings.
Yeah.
Ones with actual structure.
No. And this was the really important counterpoint. Being able to see and describe the patterns in the structured Vasarely art was completely unrelated to conspiracy beliefs. And even more interestingly, it actually negatively predicted supernatural beliefs.
Negatively. So being good at seeing real patterns might actually protect you from some irrational beliefs.
That's what it suggests. It strongly implies that it's not just being a pattern seeker in general that links to these beliefs. It's specifically the illusory kind, imposing order where there isn't any.
Wow. That's a huge clarification. It really pinpoints the mechanism. It's about seeing meaning in noise, not just seeing meaning. And it suggests ambiguity, chaos, might be fertile ground for these kinds of beliefs.
Precisely. Study 3 really nailed down that it's illusory pattern perception, seeing order in randomness. That's the key cognitive link, not just general pattern detection ability. The ambiguity seems key.
Okay, so we've seen that seeing illusory patterns can influence beliefs. But what about the other way around? Did study 4 look at whether holding the beliefs could actually make you see more patterns, like a feedback loop?
Yes, that was the really neat twist in Study 4. Instead of tweaking pattern perception, they tweaked belief and looked at the effect on perception. Participants read a short text framed as like a personal blog post.
Okay.
3 versions. One group read a text from a paranormal believer, another from a conspiracy theorist, and the third from a skeptic. After reading one of these, their tendency to see patterns was measured in 3 ways. The coin toss task again, rating the Pollock paintings again, and a new measure perceiving patterns in world events.
Patterns in world events, what does that mean exactly?
It was about whether they saw significant societal events as being causally linked, part of some larger plan, rather than just coincidences or the result of complex impersonal forces.
Got it. So did agreeing with the believer or theorist text actually make people see more patterns everywhere?
That's exactly what they found, the reversal of flow. If participants agreed more strongly with the paranormal or conspiracy texts, they subsequently showed a significantly increased tendency to perceive patterns across all 3 measures: world events, Pollock paintings, random coin tosses.
Wow.
And conversely, agreeing with the skeptic text had the opposite effect. It correlated with seeing fewer patterns, suggesting skepticism might tune you more accurately to randomness.
That really feels like a major piece of the puzzle. It's not just a one-way street where perception leads to belief.
Yeah.
Holding the belief can actually dial up your pattern detection system, making you more likely to see confirming patterns, creating this self-reinforcing cycle.
It's an incredibly powerful feedback loop, exactly. If you already believe in hidden forces, your brain becomes kind of hyper-attuned to finding anything that looks like evidence, even in random noise. That confirmation bias then locks the belief in tighter. It really shows the dynamic back and forth between our thinking processes and our beliefs.
Okay, if that loop exists, then study 5 must have looked at the downstream effects, right?
Mm.
How does believing one conspiracy theory make you susceptible to others, maybe even unrelated supernatural stuff, all potentially flowing through this enhanced pattern perception?
That was precisely the focus of Study 5. It aimed to explain something researchers often see. People who believe one conspiracy theory tend to believe lots of others, even totally unrelated ones, sometimes called a conspiratorial mindset.
Right, like they all kind of clump together.
Exactly. So the researchers wanted to see if illusory pattern perception was the cognitive glue holding this all together, explaining both the broad conspiracy thinking and the common link between conspiracy beliefs and supernatural beliefs.
How do they set up the experiment to test that chain reaction?
They had participants read an article adapted from stuff used in previous research. One version supported a specific conspiracy theory, say, about NSA surveillance or inconsistencies around 9/11. The control group read an article refuting the same theory. After reading that, they measured perception of patterns in world events again. Then they measured belief in a whole bunch of other unrelated conspiracy theories and also various supernatural beliefs.
And did they see the cascade? Did reading about one conspiracy ripple outwards through pattern perception?
They did. The findings were pretty compelling. Reading the article supporting a conspiracy theory significantly increased people's tendency to see patterns in world events generally. And crucially, that heightened pattern perception acted as a mediator. It indirectly predicted greater belief in a range of other unrelated conspiracy theories and also stronger supernatural beliefs.
So the effect wasn't direct from reading the article to believing other things, but it flowed through that increased sense of seeing patterns in the world.
Exactly. The indirect effect, via pattern perception, was statistically significant and consistent across the board. It laid out a clear cognitive pathway.
That's hugely significant. It provides a real concrete cognitive reason why these different irrational beliefs tend to cluster. It's not just some vague personality trait. It's this shared underlying mechanism of seeing connections, seeing patterns, where objectively there might be none.
It really acts as that cognitive glue, yeah. It shows that once you start seeing hidden connections in one area, that way of thinking tends to spread. You become more likely to spot similar illusory patterns elsewhere, leading you to adopt a wider range of these beliefs. This whole series of studies really builds a strong case for the central role of illusory pattern perception.
That research really paints a detailed picture of how these beliefs might form at a cognitive level. But now let's shift gears a bit, zoom out. Let's think about what conspiracy theories actually are, fundamentally. What are their defining characteristics, and how do those core features make them so impactful, so powerful in shaping how we think and act?
Right. This moves us from the cognitive engine, so to speak, to analyzing the vehicle itself, the conspiracy theory. Think of it like, I don't know, a biologist studying a virus. If you understand its basic structure, its properties like the spike protein on SARS-CoV-2, you can predict how it's going to behave, how it spreads, how it affects people.
Okay.
Similarly, understanding the inherent defining features of a conspiracy theory helps us understand its likely causes, its consequences, and how it travels through society.
So understanding the core blueprint, and you mentioned earlier, there's a key difference between just a general conspiracy and a conspiracy theory as scholars study it.
Absolutely. Critical distinction. A conspiracy in the everyday sense is just, two or more people secretly planning something. Could be planning a surprise party, totally benign. But when academics talk about a conspiracy theory, they mean something specific. A belief about a conspiracy that is of public interest, but crucially is not public knowledge. This publicness aspect, the idea that the public should know, but is being kept in the dark, is the key. It logically leads to all the other defining features.
Okay, that makes sense. So let's break down those 5 defining features you outlined and their causal implications. First up, their oppositional nature.
Right. This follows directly from that definition. If it's a secret plot the public should know about, then the conspiracy theory, by its very nature, stands against the accepted version of events, the official story, the mainstream narrative. It inherently implies that what most people believe or what authorities are saying is false, maybe even deliberately fabricated by the conspirators.
So it's automatically setting up a truth versus deception battle.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It often extends to blaming the media for being complicit or the public for being sheeple, easily fooled.
So what are the consequences of this built-in opposition?
Well, this framing of truth as a battleground means conspiracy theories are inherently part of a political or social struggle over who gets to define reality. It explains why believers often call themselves truthers, why they feel this strong need to spread the word, to wake people up. It also helps explain why belief in them often correlates with things like Machiavellianism, that cynical view that people are easily manipulated.
Okay. Feature number 2, malevolent or forbidden acts. Why is the badness or forbiddenness so central?
Again, it follows from the secrecy. For a conspiracy theory to be a theory, something hidden that should be public, the actions involved generally have to be seen as harmful against the public good, or at least forbidden, operating outside the normal rules or laws. Even theories like QAnon, which sometimes frame themselves positively, involve alleged forbidden acts against the supposed deep state.
So the secrecy implies wrongdoing.
Pretty much. And this inherent malevolence might be why believing in conspiracy theories often goes hand in hand with more negative views of humanity, more pessimism, more anxiety. If you believe hidden evil forces are at work, the world naturally feels like a darker, more threatening place.
Feature 3, ascribing agency to individuals and groups. What does this mean for how people see power?
This means conspiracy theories almost always propose that a small group of plotters has enormous power. They intentionally cause big, important things to happen. The focus is on deliberate actions by these agents rather than complex systemic issues, random chance, or just broad historical forces.
So it simplifies complex events down to the actions of a few powerful plotters.
Yes. And a major consequence is that this can wildly inflate the perceived power of certain groups. Sometimes even powerless minority groups get targeted, assigned these almost fantastical abilities to control events. This obviously fuels prejudice, suspicion, scapegoating.
Right. It gives them way too much credit in a negative way.
Exactly. And another consequence is that by blaming a specific hidden group, a few bad apples, it can actually distract from looking at real systemic problems in society. It might even, paradoxically, make people feel better about the overall system because the problem is seen as contained within this secret cabal, not something fundamentally wrong with how things are set up. This ties into that intentionality bias we talked about, seeing purpose and agency everywhere, even in randomness.
Okay, the fourth feature, epistemically risky. That sounds like a fancy way of saying they're probably not true.
Huh, yeah, it's a bit academic, but it captures an important nuance. It doesn't mean every single theory is definitely false, but that as a category, conspiracy theories are inherently more likely to be false. Why? Because they're about secret plots. There's naturally less direct evidence available compared to public events.
Less data to work with.
Right. And they often contradict established knowledge, scientific consensus, historical records. To make them work, you usually need to make a lot of extra assumptions, like the public is incredibly gullible, the conspirators are impossibly competent and leave no trace, and that big events aren't influenced by impersonal factors.
So the whole category is built on shakier ground, evidence-wise.
Exactly. This inherent riskiness helps explain why belief in conspiracy theories often correlates strongly with other risky beliefs, like paranormal ones, and also with cognitive styles that lean more on intuition and gut feelings than on careful analysis, what some researchers bluntly call bullshit receptivity. It's about the inherent vulnerability of the type of belief.
Got it. And the fifth and final feature, social constructs. How are they social beyond just involving groups of people?
They are deeply social in their purpose and their function. People share and spread conspiracy theories to achieve social goals. Sometimes it's genuinely about trying to right wrongs or hold power accountable. Other times it might be about stirring up hatred against a group or even making money. Think of conspiracy entrepreneurs.
Like Alex Jones, maybe?
That's a commonly cited example, yes. These theories become shared understandings, collective representations that bind people together. And here's the really powerful part. They don't just interpret reality, they can actually create new social realities.
How so?
They construct communities, they define groups, the perpetrators versus the victims, the enlightened believers versus the ignorant masses. These social identities then become incredibly powerful. They drive shared goals, collective action, leading to the formation of actual groups like anti-vaccine communities or flat earth societies. They build worlds.
Wow. So it's not just about individual belief, but how that belief actively builds communities, fuels action, and defines reality for those involved. That really paints a picture of their societal power.
It absolutely does. To really grasp their influence, we have to see them not just as individual thoughts, but as dynamic social forces that shape how we understand and interact with each other.
Okay, we've covered the cognitive roots, the defining features. Now let's really dig into the impact, especially on well-being and identity. The research you mentioned, particularly by Douglas and Sutton, outlines some pretty significant negative consequences.
Yes, their work lays out a range of detrimental effects pretty clearly. A major one is political disengagement. Studies consistently find that being exposed to or believing in conspiracy theories often makes people feel powerless.
Like, what's the point of voting if secret forces are running everything anyway?
Exactly that feeling. So, less likely to vote, less likely to engage in mainstream politics. Think about the effects after films like JFK came out. But it can also shape how people vote. For instance, some research linked conspiracy beliefs to support for Brexit in the UK.
So it can lead to apathy, pulling away from the system. But paradoxically, it can also fuel more extreme actions.
Unfortunately, yes. While it might decrease participation in normal politics, it's also associated with being more willing to endorse radical methods, having violent political intentions, even committing acts of vandalism. A stark recent example is the attacks on 5G masts driven by COVID-19 conspiracy theories.
Chilling. And it fuels prejudice, too.
Strongly linked. Believing anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, for example, predicts broader anti-Semitism and other forms of racism, even against groups not named in the original theory. They really reinforce divisions, foster suspicion between groups.
And then there's the whole anti-science aspect, which has huge public health implications.
Massive implications. The consequences for accepting scientific findings are enormous. We see it in climate change denial, vaccine refusal, preference for unproven alternative medicines, not following public health guidelines like during the pandemic. These anti-science views are robustly tied to conspiracy beliefs, and they really undermine our ability to tackle big collective problems.
And there's also a link to just generally riskier decision-making.
Seems so. People high in conspiracy belief might have an overly optimistic view of risks, underestimating dangers. They also tend to prefer quick, simple answers over complex, long-term ones. That combo can lead them to accept risks more readily, perhaps because the conspiracy offers a neat, immediate explanation that feels satisfying.
It really does paint a mostly negative picture. Are there any documented upsides? Anything potentially positive, even if small?
Well, the vast majority of evidence points negative, but it's fair to mention. A few researchers have suggested potential minor upsides, maybe fostering community for marginalized groups who feel ignored by the mainstream, maybe sometimes acting as a check on power by making people more suspicious of elites, or maybe inspiring action against perceived injustice.
But those are pretty tentative.
Very tentative, and generally seen as heavily outweighed by the significant, well-documented downsides we just covered. It's important to keep that balance in perspective.
Okay, now this is where things get really interesting and nuanced. Let's talk about the crucial split between paranormal belief, PB, and conspiracy theory endorsement, CTE, especially drawing on that longitudinal work by Dagnall and colleagues from 2025. We know they're strongly correlated, share common ground, but how do they diverge when it comes to positive well-being?
This is a fascinating distinction. As you said, the correlation between PB and CTE is solid, moderate to high. They share things like relying on intuition over analysis, maybe some difficulty distinguishing internal thoughts from external reality, what psychologists call reality testing, and a general tendency to jump to conclusions beyond the evidence.
Right.
Both can stem from feeling a lack of control, that insecure worldview. So similar roots in some ways.
But the outcomes for well-being are different. How do their associated worldviews contrast?
This is where they really part ways. First, worldview. Paranormal belief tends to correlate positively with believing the world is fundamentally just, good things happen to good people, life is fair overall. And interestingly, PB correlates negatively with a competitive worldview, seeing life as a dog-eat-dog struggle for resources.
Okay, so PB leans towards a more hopeful, maybe less cynical view.
Seems that way. Now contrast that with conspiracy theory endorsement, CTE. That correlates positively with the competitive worldview and also with a dangerous worldview, seeing existence as full of threats. And it links strongly to zero-sum thinking, the idea that for me to win, you have to lose.
So CTE reflects a much darker or more negative, mistrustful view of the world.
Exactly. And CTE is consistently strongly linked to paranoid thinking. PB doesn't show that link to paranoia. That's a major difference.
A huge difference in outlook. Okay, so what about the direct impact on positive well-being over time? That longitudinal aspect is key.
This is probably the most striking finding from Dagnall's research. Paranormal belief actually predicted greater levels of positive well-being over time.
Really? Higher well-being?
Yes, including things like feeling a stronger presence of meaning in life and a stronger sense of social identity. It seems PMCID can function both as a reaction to uncertainty, but also as a proactive response, offering things like reassurance, hope, maybe a feeling of connection. If it gives someone a personal sense of understanding or purpose, like seeing coincidences as meaningful synchronicity or finding comfort in spirituality, it can genuinely boost life satisfaction.
That's genuinely surprising. Suggests paranormal beliefs, for some, might actually be psychologically beneficial, but conspiracy theories, not so much.
Exactly the contrast. CTE predicted only social identity as a positive outcome. It showed no link to other positive well-being factors like finding meaning in life. It seems conspiracy beliefs tend to just confirm or consolidate anxieties and existential concerns rather than helping people resolve them or feel better about them. They solidify the negative worldview rather than protecting against it.
And how do coping strategies play into this? How do people with PB get to that meaning versus how CTE believers get their social identity?
Good question. For PB, the link to finding meaning was mediated positively by both active coping, tackling problems head-on, and optimism. So when people with PB engage proactively and hopefully, their well-being improves. Interestingly, avoidant coping could also sometimes mediate the search for meaning and social identity in PB, so it's a bit complex there.
Okay, but for CTE, the coping link is different.
Markedly different. For CTE, the link to social identity was only positively mediated by avoidant coping.
Only avoidant coping, what does that imply?
It implies that for conspiracy believers, that sense of belonging, that social identity, often comes from retreating, pulling back into groups of like-minded people who validate their views. It seems to be more about managing anxiety by sticking with the in-group and avoiding confrontation with conflicting realities, rather than actively finding meaning or using optimistic strategies. It's shared identity built on shared avoidance, perhaps.
So let me try to summarize this key divergence. Both PB and CTE involve finding patterns, often illusory ones, to deal with uncertainty. But PB can link up with adaptive coping, optimism, and finding real meaning. CTE, however, seems more consistently tied to a negative, competitive view of the world, and a social identity formed mainly through avoidance and hunkering down with fellow believers.
That captures the essence of the distinction beautifully. One path, though unconventional, seems capable of leading towards positive psychological outcomes and purpose for some. The other seems more likely to reinforce negativity, mistrust, and an identity rooted in perceived threat and avoidance.
What an absolutely fascinating journey we've been on today. We started by digging deep into the surprising cognitive origins of these irrational beliefs, finding they're really rooted in illusory pattern perception, that basic human drive to connect dots even when the lines aren't really there.
hmm And we walk through that series of studies showing how this plays out with conspiracy theories and supernatural beliefs, and how the beliefs themselves can actually strengthen that pattern-seeking tendency, creating that powerful feedback loop.
Right. And then we zoomed out, realizing conspiracy theories aren't just random thoughts. They have these core features: being oppositional, involving malevolence, focusing on agency, being epistemically risky, acting as social constructs that fundamentally define them and shape their impact.
Those defining features really help explain why they have the effects they do, yeah.
And finally, that crucial, nuanced distinction. While paranormal beliefs might, perhaps surprisingly, offer some adaptive psychological benefits for some people, helping them find meaning, cope with uncertainty, maybe through optimism, conspiracy theories seem to chart a different course.
A path more consistently linked to a negative, competitive worldview, solidifying anxieties rather than resolving them, and fostering a social identity often built on avoidance. It really highlights that not all beliefs that look similar on the surface function the same way psychologically.
It really does. So, as you, our listener, reflect on all of this, here's something to think about. Knowing how deep this pattern-seeking drive runs in all of us, and seeing how powerfully these narratives can shape our social worlds and even who we feel we are, what does this mean for you? How do you approach information? How do you try to sort facts from compelling fiction in this, information-saturated world?
And maybe the bigger question, how can we all learn to harness this incredible innate pattern-seeking ability we have? Use it for genuine understanding, for critical thinking, for progress, rather than letting it accidentally lead us down paths paved with illusory connections.
Definitely something worth pondering long after you finish listening.